At my engagement party, my father demanded I give my $50,000 wedding fund to my reckless brother, slapped me when I refused, and ended up getting arrested in front of 70 guests. I grew up in the same house as my brother Tyler, but you wouldn't know it by the way our parents treated us. From as early as I can remember, it was like I had been handed a clipboard and told, "You're the responsible one," while Tyler was handed a golden ticket labeled beloved son. He could do no wrong. If he messed up, and he messed up a lot, it was brushed off with a laugh, an excuse, or a check from my parents to make the problem go away. When he racked up charges on their credit card, they paid it off without a word. When he totaled 2 cars before the age of 20, they replaced them without a blink. When he dropped out of college after barely a semester, they just sighed and told him to take his time figuring life out. Meanwhile, I was expected to understand. Always understand. Be the mature one. Be the one who doesn't cause trouble, who doesn't need anything, who's already got it all figured out. I paid for my own education. Every last cent of it. I worked through high school, then juggled 3 jobs in college, waiting tables, tutoring, and data entry, just to scrape by. There were nights I came home so tired I couldn't feel my legs, but no one noticed. I couldn't even afford the campus meal plan, so I lived off instant oatmeal and dollar store lentils. While Tyler went to parties and got bailed out, I was skipping meals to afford textbooks. The part that always got me wasn't the money. It was the attention, the affection, the way my mom would light up when Tyler walked into a room like he was the sun coming through the window. The way my dad talked about him with this half-proud, half-resigned tone, like he was some lovable rogue in a movie. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, maybe they'd see me too. Maybe they'd be proud. But it never happened. I could win scholarships, get straight A's, even land my first real job before graduation, and all I got was a nod or a "that's nice, honey." No bragging to friends. No framed photos of my graduation. But Tyler's community college certificate? Front and center on the mantle. I used to think there was something wrong with me. That maybe I wasn't lovable the way Tyler was. That maybe being good didn't count unless you were also charming or reckless or needed saving. But over time, I realized it wasn't about me. It was about them. About how some people confuse drama with depth and mistake neediness for love. I became the shadow because someone had to hold the flashlight. Someone had to keep things from falling apart. That someone was me. And I did it all without asking for anything back, because I learned early on that asking got you nothing but silence. After college, I got a job as a pharmacist, not exactly a glamorous profession, but it was stable, paid well, and gave me a quiet kind of pride. Every prescription I filled, every long shift I pulled behind the counter, felt like another step forward from the chaos I grew up with. I didn't go out much. I didn't buy fancy clothes, or take vacations, or splurge on the little luxuries everyone else around me seemed to live for. My version of luxury was a color-coded spreadsheet with wedding fund at the top and a steadily climbing total on the bottom row. That number became my obsession, my hope, my proof that I could build something beautiful without owing anyone a damn thing. I wanted the kind of wedding people said I couldn't afford, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that I didn't have to settle for hand-me-downs and almosts. I didn't want a loan from my parents. I didn't want strings or expectations or sideways glances when I chose something that didn't fit their version of reasonable. I wanted a dress I picked myself, a venue I'd driven by 100 times, thinking, one day. I wanted to know that every flower, every meal, every second of that day came from me and the life I built brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. So I cut corners. I clipped coupons like a religion. I bought groceries in bulk and tracked every expense down to the cent. My social life shriveled, but I didn't care. While my friends were getting engaged and thrown bridal showers funded by smiling parents, I was working weekends and putting aside $200 here, $500 there. I opened a high-yield savings account, set up automatic transfers every month, and never touched it. Not once. Even when I wanted to. Even when emergencies came up and my car needed new tires or a friend's birthday rolled around, and I couldn't afford to say yes. For 5 years I lived like that. Not miserably, but deliberately. Every shift was another rung on the ladder. Every sacrifice a step closer to freedom. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about shedding the weight of dependency, of needing someone to catch me if I fell. I'd spent my whole life watching Tyler blow through chances like they were infinite, cushioned by safety nets I never had. I didn't want to owe anyone. Not for my education, not for my rent, and definitely not for the most important day of my life. When I finally hit $50,000, I stared at the number on the screen for so long it stopped looking real. I sat in my tiny kitchen, still in my scrubs, dinner cold beside me, and just let it sink in. I had done this. No cosigner. No bailouts. No emotional manipulation disguised as family support. Just me, my stubbornness, and a quiet, relentless refusal to live the way I was raised. It wasn't just a wedding fund, it was proof that I could dream big and still be grounded, that I could want something beautiful and not apologize for it, that I could build a life on my terms and not be afraid it would all come crashing down. It was at a medical conference in downtown Chicago, one of those multi-day things filled with lectures, panels, and too much bad hotel coffee, when I met Michael. I wasn't looking for anyone. Honestly, I had built such high walls around my life by then that letting someone in felt more like a risk than a reward. But he was sitting across from me at a round table on pharmacy ethics, of all things, taking notes in a beat-up leather journal and asking the kind of questions that didn't feel performative. He wasn't trying to be impressive. He was actually listening. That caught my attention. That kept it. We talked during lunch, then again after the last session, and then over coffee that spilled into dinner. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't charming in that rehearsed, exhausting way so many people try to be. He was steady, grounded, and curious. He asked about my job, my goals, my wedding fund. Yes, I mentioned it, not to test him, but because it was such a fundamental part of who I was at that point, it would have felt dishonest to hide it. And he didn't flinch. He didn't laugh. He just nodded and said something that stuck with me. That's smart. Most people plan for the wedding and forget about the marriage. From that moment on, it wasn't a question of if, but when. We didn't rush it. We dated slowly, deliberately, like we were both trying to do everything the right way for once. When we moved in together, it wasn't because we were swept up in romance. It was because we'd sat down with a spreadsheet and figured out what made the most sense, financially and emotionally. That's what it was like with him. Every decision felt like a collaboration, not a compromise. When he proposed, he didn't do it with fireworks or an audience or some over-the-top gesture that needed to be Instagrammed. He did it on a quiet Saturday morning in our apartment, sitting on the couch with my feet in his lap, holding out a simple ring and saying, "Let's build this together." And I said yes without hesitation, not just to the ring or the day or the future we were planning, but to the feeling that I wasn't carrying the weight alone anymore. He didn't just respect my financial boundaries, he matched them. When I told him about my $50,000 wedding fund, he didn't act threatened or emasculated. He asked how he could contribute. And he did. Not just with money, though he added to the fund without question, but with energy, time, and emotional bandwidth. He sat with me through venue tours and cake tastings and Excel sheets filled with vendor quotes. He never once asked why we couldn't just let my parents help. He never once pushed for something bigger just to show off. He got it, he got me. Together, we planned the kind of wedding I dreamed of, not extravagant, not wasteful, but intentional. A celebration that reflected who we were, not who anyone else expected us to be. Every decision had our fingerprints on it. Every detail told a story. It was the beginning of something I had spent my whole life working toward. A partnership built on respect, shared values, and the quiet, radical act of choosing each other every single day. The night of our engagement party was supposed to be the culmination of everything I'd worked for. A celebration of a love that had grown from shared values and earned trust, surrounded by the few people in our lives who mattered most. The venue was simple but elegant, a little courtyard lit with strings of warm lights, filled with laughter, champagne flutes, and that kind of rare lightness that only comes after years of grinding your way towards something good. I was wearing a pale blue dress I'd saved up for, and Michael kept sneaking glances at me like he still couldn't believe I'd said yes. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself feel proud. That lasted all of 30 minutes. My mother found me near the bar, hand on my elbow, her voice tight with false sweetness. "Your father and I need a quick word. Just the three of us." I followed without thinking, still high on the energy of the evening, thinking maybe they wanted to apologize for the years of neglect, or say something kind for once, anything. She led me through a side door into a dim back hallway behind the kitchen, where my father was already waiting, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight I could hear it. What followed didn't feel real. "We need the money," he said, like it was some overdue debt I owed them. "You've got 50,000 saved up. Give it to Tyler." At first, I laughed, short, sharp, confused. I thought it was a joke, a bad one. But their faces didn't change. No humor, no guilt, just expectation. My mother stepped in, her voice low and coaxing like she was trying to keep me from spooking. "It's serious, Cassandra. He's in trouble. These aren't credit cards or student loans this time. He owes people, real people, people who don't forget. You give him the money, and we keep the peace. Otherwise. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I felt the floor tilt under me. My chest tightened, the air suddenly too thin. "You're asking me to give up my future so Tyler can clean up his mess." Again, I wasn't even yelling, but my voice sounded sharp in the quiet. "That's my wedding. That's everything I've worked for. My father took a step closer. You can have another wedding, he said. You can rebuild. But he can't get out of this unless you do the right thing. The right thing? I asked, and I could hear my voice cracking now. You mean like how I paid for my own education? Like how I've never once asked you for help while you bailed him out over and over again? You mean that kind of right thing? He didn't answer, just stared at me, jaw twitching, hands clenched into fists at his sides. My mother reached for my arm again, her grip firmer now. Michael doesn't need to know. Just tell him you changed your mind about the venue. The guest list. Something. He'll understand. But he wouldn't. And more than that, I wouldn't understand. I had drawn so many lines in the sand for them over the years and erased them all to keep the peace. But this was different. This was my life, my dignity, my refusal to be turned into their personal safety net while Tyler kept falling. No, I said, and it was the most solid thing I'd said in years. No, I won't. My father's face went cold. Not angry, something worse. Hollow, like a mask that had dropped. Then, without warning, he hit me. Open hand, fast and hard across my face. The sound echoed off the tile walls like a gunshot. I stumbled, my cheek exploding in pain, my body frozen in shock. My mother gasped but didn't move. That moment, that sound, that silence, that numb split second after impact, severed whatever thread had still connected me to them. Not just because of the slap, but because neither of them looked sorry. He stood over me like he expected me to apologize, and she just looked away. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry. I walked back through the kitchen, through the doors, past the tables, and the music and the small talk, my face burning, my heart suddenly unfamiliar inside my chest. I found Michael by the bar, still smiling, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He looked up at me, and his smile dropped immediately. Cass. And all I could do was stand there, shaking, trying to remember how to breathe. I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream or throw anything or collapse in tears like you see in movies. I just walked out of that hallway, past the fairy lights and the music and the carefully arranged flowers, with one side of my face throbbing and my body moving on autopilot. I could feel the sting of my father's handprint blooming across my cheek, heat radiating like a second heartbeat. Michael was already moving toward me, worry etched deep into his face, but I held up a hand to stop him. Not because I didn't want comfort, but because I needed control. I wasn't going to be dragged into another cycle of excuses and silence. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 right there in the middle of my own engagement party, with the music still playing and guests still chatting in little clusters. My voice was calm. Too calm, maybe. I gave them the address and said clearly, "My name is Cassandra Mitchell. I was just assaulted by my father. He's intoxicated, still on the premises, and I believe he's a danger to others." There was a silence around me that hadn't existed 2 minutes before. People turned, half-heard phrases dying in their throats, glasses frozen midair. My friend Olivia, who'd followed me into the hallway earlier because she knew, somehow, she always knew, was already pulling out her phone. She didn't say anything, just handed it to me and nodded once. On the screen was a clear video of the slap. No ambiguity, no guesswork, just the sound of skin on skin and my body recoiling. The police arrived fast, faster than I expected. The sight of them at the edge of the courtyard broke the party completely. Guests fell into whispers and gasps. People began backing away like the air had shifted, like they'd wandered into something they weren't supposed to see. I stepped forward, handed them Olivia's phone, and explained everything again, quietly, but without softening the truth. My father didn't deny it. He didn't even try. He was leaning against the bar by then, a glass of something dark in his hand, his eyes glassy and unfocused. When the officers approached, he straightened up and tried to wave them off, slurring something about family business and misunderstandings. But the moment they asked him to step outside, he snapped. His voice rose, sharp and belligerent, and then he shoved one of the officers, hard enough to stumble him back. That was all it took. They cuffed him in front of everyone. He screamed, called them names, shouted at me across the patio like I was the one who'd betrayed him. My mother stood a few feet away, pale and unmoving, clutching her purse like a shield. Michael was behind me now, silent, his hand hovering near mine, but not touching unless I asked. I didn't look away when they led my father out. I made sure he saw me watching. Later, we'd find out there was more. The officers breathalyzed him at the scene and found him well over the limit. When they ran his name through the system, other things came up, past charges that had never gone anywhere, financial ties that traced back to underground gambling networks, even a few warnings flagged by federal agents. It was like someone had lifted a rock I'd been taught never to touch, and underneath was a rot that ran deeper than even I had imagined. But in that moment, all I felt was stillness. Not peace, not relief, just stillness. I had spent my whole life being the quiet one, the stable one, the fixer. And now, for the first time, I had drawn a line they couldn't erase. I had said no, and meant it. And the world, somehow, didn't fall apart. The arrest was only the beginning. At first, I thought the fallout would be contained to the party, that the worst of it was the public shame, the betrayal, the surreal image of my father being cuffed and walked past a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres. But the real damage started to show days later, when people I barely spoke to began reaching out. Not with condolences or support, but confusion. Aunt Doreen called first. Her voice was careful, like she was trying to make sense of something she didn't want to believe. "Cassandra, honey," she said, "I know this might not be the right time, but do you remember that $10,000 we gave your dad for your surgery sophomore year?" I froze. "What surgery?" A long pause. Then, even quieter, "The one he said you needed but didn't want to tell anyone about. He said you were too embarrassed, that it was for something personal." My stomach dropped. I didn't say anything, just let the silence speak. And that was the beginning. The calls kept coming. Distant cousins, old neighbors, even one of my mother's bridge friends. All of them with the same story in different variations. They had lent money to my parents, specifically to my father, over the past 15 years, under the impression that it was for me. For my college tuition. For an apartment when I couldn't make rent. For urgent dental work. For therapy. For a deposit on a car. Always framed as a quiet emergency, I was too proud to ask for help with myself. They believed they were being kind. They thought they were helping a smart, hard-working girl stay afloat in hard times. Instead, their generosity had been funneled into a black hole, my father's gambling debts, Tyler's constant chaos, and God knows what else. When I tried to explain, when I told them I had never once asked for help from anyone, that I had worked 3 jobs through college, that I had never missed a rent payment in my life, there was this pause, like the math wasn't adding up in their heads. Some of them apologized, shocked and ashamed. Some sounded skeptical, like they couldn't quite wrap their heads around just how deeply they'd been lied to. And I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't lived through it, I wouldn't have believed it either. The worst part? My name was on everything. My father had used it as currency, leverage. He'd spun this image of a struggling daughter barely keeping her head above water, and they bought it because that's the kind of girl he raised me to be. Quiet, responsible, unquestioning. The kind of person who wouldn't know how to defend herself because she'd never been taught she had the right to. The investigators combed through it all. Bank transfers, emails, voicemails, even handwritten notes my father had left in drawers and glove compartments. The picture they painted was brutal. Over $100,000 collected over nearly 2 decades, all under my name. And not a single cent had touched my hands. There was one message that stuck with me more than any other. It came from an uncle I hadn't spoken to in years. His voice cracked as he told me. He said, "You were sick, Cass. That you didn't want us to know how bad it was. I took money from my retirement account. I didn't have words for that. I still don't. The fraud wasn't just financial. It was emotional. It hollowed out relationships I didn't even know were being weaponized. It rewrote my past in ways I'm still untangling. Every time someone said no to me, every job I didn't get, every look I got that I couldn't explain, I now wonder if it was because of something they'd heard. Some version of me they'd been sold behind my back. And through all of it, I kept thinking about Tyler. How he got to be the reckless one because I was cast as the tragedy. How he walked through life cushioned by lies wrapped in my name, while I clawed my way through every setback thinking I was just unlucky. But it wasn't luck. It was theft. And it started in my own home. The message came in at 2:13 a.m., a time that always signaled crisis when it came to Tyler. "Call me, please." Just 2 words, but I knew what they meant. The same old panic, the same old fire he'd set and expected someone else to put out. I didn't answer. Not right away. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding with a rhythm I'd come to recognize not as empathy, but exhaustion. The next morning, he showed up at my apartment unannounced. Thinner than I remembered, hollowed out in the face, with the kind of edge in his voice that came from desperation, not sincerity. "I just need $5,000, he said, like it was nothing. Like that money would fall out of the sky if he asked nicely enough. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't move. He kept talking, his voice cracking as he tried to sell me on the idea like it was some minor inconvenience I could fix. "It's not for drugs, I swear," he said. "It's to pay off some people. It's complicated. It always was." Then he said it. The thing I didn't see coming. They used my accounts. My business accounts. For moving money. I didn't know how deep it was until it was too late. I just looked at him. "You let them launder money through your company?" He didn't deny it. Just rubbed his face with both hands and let out this long, hollow exhale. I thought I could manage it. I thought I'd make enough to cover it before anyone noticed. Then the audit happened. And now the feds are involved. I've got meetings with investigators. They're freezing everything. For a moment, I felt something like nausea. Not sympathy. Just that familiar tilt of the floor when you realize you're standing on another collapsing piece of the foundation you thought might hold, if only for a little while longer. You want me to fix this? I said. Again. He nodded. Didn't even bother lying. I told him no. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I said it like I was saying the time. Flat, factual. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. Come on, Cass. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm trying to survive. So was I said. Every time I was scraping by, every time I was skipping meals or walking to work because I couldn't afford gas, you were out there burning through money that was never yours. And now you want to bail out? From me? He didn't have an answer. Just stood there, jaw clenched, face twitching with something that looked like disbelief. As if the reality that I was done, truly, finally done, was hitting him for the first time. The next I heard, he was working nights at a bar near the airport. The kind of place with sticky floors and fluorescent lights and regulars who tipped and crumpled once. He'd sold his car, a black BMW he couldn't afford in the first place, and moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a building where the elevators didn't always work and the heat came on too late. No more trust fund illusions. No more backdoor rescues. For the first time in his life, there was no one to clean up the mess. And for the first time in mine, I wasn't the one crawling through the wreckage. It wasn't some dramatic breakdown that sent me to therapy. There was no rock bottom, no night I couldn't stop crying. It was quieter than that. Just this persistent hum of exhaustion I couldn't shake. Like I was always bracing for impact, even in stillness. Like my nervous system didn't believe me when I said it was over. The first few sessions, I talked about logistics. The wedding fund. The fraud. The slap. I listed events like items on a grocery list, detached and matter of fact. My therapist, Marla, didn't interrupt much. She just listened, nodded, and asked questions that landed harder than they sounded. When did you first start feeling like you had to earn love? That one took the breath out of me. Over time, we started pulling at threads. Things I'd long buried under the weight of responsibility. Like the time my mom borrowed my graduation gift money because we're all in this together. Or when I gave up my college acceptance to a more expensive out-of-state school because Tyler needs more support right now and it's selfish to leave. Or how I was always the one who had to be calm, be forgiving, be strong. While Tyler spiraled and my parents rallied around him like his chaos was a natural disaster no one could prevent. Marla called it what it was, gaslighting. Not the explosive kind, not the kind that makes headlines, but the insidious version that rewrites reality in small, quiet ways. The kind that turns self-respect into selfishness, that repackages exploitation as sacrifice, that teaches you to feel guilty for wanting basic consideration, like not having your life savings handed off to someone else. I started remembering moments differently. I'd thought they were normal, just family dynamics, just the way things were. Like when my dad told me I was lucky they let me live at home rent-free for 2 months after college, while I was working 60 hours a week and covering half the grocery bills. Or when my mom told me not to bring up my promotions at work around Tyler, because he's already feeling bad about where he's at. Or when they laughed behind my back at my budgeting spreadsheets, like my self-discipline was a cute personality quirk instead of a lifeline. Marla helped me see it for what it was. I hadn't been the golden child. I'd been the functional one. The one they leaned on, drained, manipulated, and expected to keep smiling because family sticks together. I learned to name things. Emotional labor, enmeshment, conditional affection. Words I'd never used before, but that fit like keys and locks I didn't know existed. And I learned that setting boundaries wasn't cruel. It was survival. So I started saying no. Not loudly. Not performatively. Just no. No. I won't be attending that family dinner. No, I'm not available for calls at midnight. No, I'm not going to explain myself or apologize for creating distance. I stopped justifying my choices. I stopped trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding me. Therapy didn't fix everything, but it gave me the language to stop blaming myself. It gave me the clarity to stop participating in my own exploitation. And maybe most importantly, it gave me permission to see my past not as a series of personal failures, but as a system I survived. One I'm no longer willing to carry on my back. We got married on a windy afternoon in early fall, in a quiet botanical garden tucked behind the city library. No ballroom, no plated dinner, no 5-tier cake. Just a circle of chairs on the grass, some wildflowers in mason jars, and the people who had stood beside us when everything else fell apart. It wasn't the wedding I once imagined when I was tallying expenses and bookmarking venues, but it was exactly what I needed. Not a performance, not a spectacle, just the truth of it, spoken out loud, with no apologies and no pretense. I wore a dress I found on consignment and altered myself in the evenings after work. Michael wore a suit he already owned. My best friend made the cake, simple and crooked and perfect. There were mismatched chairs and disposable cameras on the tables, and a playlist we'd made together on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. And it was beautiful, not because of how it looked, but because of what it wasn't. It wasn't built on debt. It wasn't for show. It didn't exist to impress or convince or prove anything to anyone outside that garden. The money we'd saved, the money I'd once guarded like armor, went towards something real. A down payment on a small house with a creaky porch and a kitchen that needed work. A year of therapy sessions for both of us, because we wanted to build a life that didn't just survive, but healed. A reliable car. A savings buffer. The foundation for something solid, something ours. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain any of it. I didn't make excuses for keeping the guest list short or skipping traditions. I didn't feel guilty when I said no to people who hadn't earned a seat at our table. I didn't flinch when someone asked why my parents weren't there. I didn't lie. I just said, it's better this way. And it was. There was no grand entrance. No fireworks. No scripted vows. Just a promise, quiet and sure, that I would no longer shrink myself to make other people comfortable. That I would no longer mistake endurance for love. That I would no longer spend my life cleaning up after other people's disasters while mine went ignored. When Michael and I said our vows, it felt less like a ceremony and more like a contract with the future. One written not in fantasy or obligation, but in clear-eyed honesty. We didn't pledge perfection. We pledged presence, respect, a willingness to stay, to do the work, to tell the truth even when it's hard. That was the dream. Not the venue, not the dress, just the freedom to choose each other without losing ourselves. And I wouldn't trade that for any chandelier or champagne tower in the world. I don't know the exact moment the shift began. Maybe it was when my mother called me, voice low and unsure, asking if I had the name of a therapist she could talk to. Maybe it was the silence that followed. Weeks where I expected old patterns, manipulation wrapped in nostalgia, but instead got distance and space that didn't feel like punishment. Eventually, she told me she had started going. That she was beginning to see the stories she had told herself for decades. The ones where love meant control and parenting meant martyrdom. She didn't ask me to forgive her. She didn't beg to be close again. She just said she was working on it. And for the first time in my life, I believed her. Tyler, too, began to change, but from a place I had nothing to do with. He took a job at a local bar and kept it. Sold the car, canceled the credit cards, started answering calls from creditors instead of avoiding them. One day, he sent a short message. You were right. I wasn't ready to hear it, but you were right. No asks. No dramatics. Just a sentence. That alone was progress. But I didn't rush in. I didn't cradle their transformations like delicate glass. I let them figure out who they were without my scaffolding, because I had my own life to live. I didn't go back to being the fixer. I didn't put my own peace on pause so someone else could get a head start. I stopped twisting myself into shapes that made other people feel more comfortable, more secure, more loved. I built a new family. Slowly. Intentionally. Michael and I filled our home with friends who showed up, not just when things were easy, but when they were inconvenient. People who didn't flinch at boundaries. Who didn't expect perfection. Who didn't equate love with sacrifice. We cooked together, celebrated small things, helped each other move, grieved losses, and held each other accountable. Not out of obligation, but because we chose each other. I still get asked about my family, the one I came from. Sometimes I tell the whole story. Sometimes I don't. But the truth never changes. I'm no longer someone's fallback plan. I'm no longer a vessel for guilt or expectation. I'm no longer the background character in someone else's crisis. I am not the responsible one, the shadow, the spare. I am not the daughter who must understand, must give, must disappear. I'm Cassandra, and I get to choose what that name means now.